We can do this now, and we can do it later.
Sorry, we're live.
Okay, great. I'm taking it now. Thanks. Cool. I'll do one more.
Good evening and welcome to Africa Soft Power's Words on Skin. My name is Nkiru Balong, founder of the Africa Soft Power Project, an initiative focused on how Africa can optimize its creative industries and harness its soft power effectively to propel itself forward while championing the inclusion of African voices in global discourse, as well as building solidarity between Africans and people of African heritage. Part of our Black History Month celebration, Words on Skin, is this conversation about Black identity and feminism in an era of BLM, exploring also the power of the arts as a springboard for progress and change. Before we start, I thought I'd share one of my favorite definitions of feminism by Caitlin Moran. She says, "What is feminism? Simply the belief that women should be as free as men, however not dim, deluded, badly dressed, fat, receding, lazy, and smug they might be. As women, we have to be better to be in the room, and as Black people, we often have to do much better just to get through the doors. So you can imagine being Black and woman at the same time. So why do we gotta be better when the rest of the room is so mediocre?" Welcome Kenya, Uju, Jessica, and Kelechi to this forum. Our moderator this evening is Tamara Arai, who is head of Diaspora, Public Policy for Facebook Africa, Middle East, and Turkey. She was previously lead for Diaspora Partnerships at UNICEF and has been a Diaspora Technical Advisor to USAID and the African Union, amongst others. In 2012, she was recognized by President Obama for her work as White House Champion of Change. Tamara is profiled as one of the 5 African-American individuals in the Smithsonian National Museum of African-American History and Culture's Next Generation Voices exhibit. I mean, Tamara is incredible. We're so pleased and happy and proud to have her here. I want to say a very huge thank you to our beautiful audience for being here today, and of course to our strategic and media partners for supporting this event. Before handing over to Tamara, my co-convener, Obi will say a few words. Obi, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to welcome all the ladies to Africa Soft Power. And that's probably about this only thing I really think I need to say. So I think today I think is just a day to listen and learn and try to understand and try to support. So have a great session. Samha, over to you. Back to you.
Thank you, Obi, and thank you, Nkiru, for putting together such an incredible session, giving us a chance to explore, I think, what's on our minds every day, every hour of every day is part of our existence. So this is really, really incredible. As Nkiru shared, my name is Samhar, and really a lot of my time is spent thinking about the power of Black women around the world, of the diaspora, and the ways in which that I believe the diaspora is truly, truly a feminist framework. It's a feminist space. And I think today's conversation will help unpack that. But even more importantly, as already been discussed, this is about soft power, and this is about Africa's soft power. And soft doesn't just mean, cuddly or cushiony. It's really about the invisible forms of power that aren't always recognized, and the ways in which femininity is shown through the African lens, through the Black lens globally. What does it mean? And with that soft power, how we can drive solidarity. So today we're thinking about that through the lens of our words and the power of storytelling and writing. And our panelists are incredible examples of how being Black, being a Black woman, being in the global diaspora, having our commitment to amplifying voice and using our words for storytelling helps not only elevate our experiences, but also helps sort of equalize where power lies in this world and where writing can be just as powerful as maybe the other forms of might and power that is so often identified for the first line of defense. I want to say a couple of things about soft power that I've learned in my years through my work at Facebook and also previously. Power is always an elusive concept, and it really depends on where you sit in the spectrum of who is determining that power. Oftentimes when we think of power, it's hard. It's the might, it's the force. It's this dynamic of strong versus weak. But I was lucky enough to learn and from one of the people who coined the term soft power, and who coined the term soft power in the sense of diplomacy. And we think of this as a diplomatic space, particularly for countries and communities who are at odds with each other. But even at the granular level, it can also be brought in through a gender lens of the soft power aspects. Soft power can include sports, it can include plays and the arts and drama, and it can include writing, literature, and storytelling. And so this is where, when we think of it from an African concept, that writing and our voices and literature aren't meant to be on the side as an enjoyable form of entertainment. It can be, but it is actually one of the most dynamic forms of power that not only express voices, but highlight differences, highlight conflicts, highlight resolution, highlight trust, all these amazing things. And so I think today we'll have that also come out. Let me introduce the panelists. Women who have inspired many, many around the world, many in the communities that we come from, and who are, to this day, I think, continuing to inspire people all over the world. I want to begin by briefly sharing who we have, and then they'll get more into their work. First, Kelechi Okafor, writer, presenter, and podcaster, challenging how we think about race and femininity, who's also a regular media contributor. Her podcast, Say Your Mind, is centered around social commentary on current affairs and pop culture from a Black British women's perspective. Hi, Kelechi, great to have you. Our second panelist, Jessica Horn, feminist activist, writer, and strategist with roots in Uganda. A thought leader in the women's rights field, her research and analysis has been published in The Guardian, The Lancet, Feminist Africa, Al Jazeera, Open Democracy, The Feminist Wire, Africa is a Country, among other platforms. Her essay, So We Don't Die Tomorrow, is published in Kenya. Our other panelist, Kenya Hunt's Girl, Essays on Black Womanhood book, which was just released. And Jessica's debut poetry pamphlet, Speaking in Tongues, is included in the Mouthmark Book of Poetry. Jessica, wonderful to be with you. Uju Asika, a multi-award nominated blogger, screenwriter, and creative consultant. She is the author of Bringing Up Race, How to Raise a Kind Child in a Prejudiced World. The London Evening Standard selected Bringing Up Race as one of the best books of September 2020, calling it timely and important. Her work has been featured in Good Housekeeping, Marie Claire, BBC Radio 2, Good Morning Sunday, and BBC Radio 4, among numerous other outlets. Welcome, Uju. Last but not least, we have Ms. Kenya Hunt, fashion director of Grazia UK. Her career spans working for some of the world's most influential titles on both sides of the Atlantic as assistant editor at the seminal magazine Jane and deputy editor of Elle UK. Her writing has appeared in The Guardian, Vogue, Marie Claire, The Evening Standard, and many other publications. She's the author of Girl, Essays on Black Womanhood. Thank you and welcome, ladies. How are you all doing?
Wow, it's great to be here. Thank you for having us.
It's fantastic. Lovely, lovely. So we want to kick it off. I think there's a lot to be said here about what it means to be a Black woman in today's world. What will the next generation learn from our experiences, from the experiences of women before us? What are they going to learn about navigating racism and prejudice, sexism, misogyny, patriarchy, these things that are just ever so prevalent in our lens so much? But also, what is the future of writing and books and storytelling in an age that is increasingly digital, increasingly challenged with short attention spans? People want immediacy, and a book and a journey of writing is such a personal process that you hope every reader goes through. I want to discuss these questions. So to kick it off, as Black women, let's talk about how is it that we can teach the younger generation, the next generation, about the prejudice and racism that they'll most likely face? How do we teach them to be proud and confident? And what have you learned as a Black woman navigating those spaces? I will open it up to anyone because I know you all have something to say, but welcome your thoughts. Kenya, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start actually. So the word community is one of those terms that I think people love to use right now. And I think it can be one of those terms where it can almost lose its meaning when it's used in a marketing sense. But I feel like community is so vital to the story of us, particularly Black women. And when I think about my own experiences growing up and growing into the person that I am today, I think community has very much been a part of the making of me. And that's from my earliest formative experiences in Virginia, which is not the easiest place to grow up in as a young Black girl. But it was because of the strength of the community around me that I grew up experiencing Blackness and Black womanhood as this incredibly joyful, beautiful thing. And then when I left the sort of safe boundaries of home to go to university and then to New York, where I began to really start to experience things like colorism in a different way and racism in the workplace, navigating these overwhelmingly white circumstances in the fashion industry, which is really not an easy space for anyone to navigate, no matter what race you are. And it's doubly difficult when you are dealing, with the challenges of that industry as a Black woman. It was, again, the community that I had around me. So, Black women who were in similar positions elsewhere in the industry. And even now, living in London and moving to a new country and building a life in a new country where I didn't know anyone Black to start, I had to really go out and seek and build a community for myself. So once again, it was just the people that I had around me. I feel like that was and also that's a really vital part of, of my book. But I think just looking back, that's very much been a key thing. And with the work that I do with the mentees in my life, I always tell them how important, I remind them how important it is to try to foster that for themselves as they're navigating their own studies and their adult and working life that is to come afterwards.
Thanks. Maybe I'll add, I totally agree with Kenya about the importance and value of community and also finding ways to make sure that we keep building it. It says something that when we're thinking about our Blackness in a Pan-African sense, that the first thought has to be thinking about how we would teach the next generation about oppression, right? I think if you're from a privileged community, that's not the first thought in your mind. So that says something about the reality of the structures of inequality that we live in. But I also really think that, alongside community, because that community is a base of solidarity, right? Is this thing of teaching all of us and teaching next generations activist history. Because I think it can be quite disempowering to only learn about the ways that you've been harmed as a community. But there's tremendous power in learning as a front step, actually, about the ways that you have transformed the world as a community. And I think that that's really powerful. And I feel like there's something about that storytelling that we do that also needs to include some kind of memorialization, right, of our contemporary and past activism, because that's really what inspires. And I feel like it builds confidence and it gives us an understanding of the ways that, again, we've transformed. We're by no means passive victims of this structural inequality, right? We're absolutely agents of transformation, and it's never only just been for us. It's always been for everybody. We improve the world. So I feel like that's super powerful. And I have a young daughter, so I'm very conscious of it at the moment. But, teaching her the names, teaching her the little stories already, little books about Wangari Maathai and all kinds, you can find them these days. That to me is the way that we teach. We teach about our legacy of history, of contribution to transformation and justice.
Kelechi, Uju, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that what has been said so far by Kenya and Jessica is so important and so necessary. For me, I look at the day-to-day things that we do, and I believe in telling the truth. I think that it's important as Black women that we tell the truth in order to, if we want to see the truth told in the world, we have to tell the truth immediately and in our immediate environments. And so what truths are we telling to our children? What truths are we telling to ourselves, right? Because what do we believe about ourselves? I think that it's easy for a lot of us, especially when we are accomplished and articulate, quote unquote, to be able to say the things that people want to hear. But it's what are we living? What are we living? What are the truths that we are living in our day-to-day lives? Because that's what's going to truly transform things, because there's a lot of conversations happening. How many panel discussions, for instance, have we all done collectively where we're talking about these things? But how much change then are we seeing out in the world? That's not because, we're expected to do everything, but the chain is breaking at some point. We are all talking, and then when it's the time for action, what does that look like in the home? What does that look like in the world? Then how does that play out in the world? So for me, I find that my way of kind of contributing to the change that I would like to see, that I would like for my son to see, is how I'm living in the day-to-day, to show tenderness, to show vulnerability, and to educate myself, and as well as educating myself, to unlearn all the narratives that do not serve me, thus cannot serve the collective. So, these are my main focuses, especially for me. I'm really, really interested in anger. I talk a lot about anger. I'm perceived in the Black British space as just being angry. Oh, here goes Kelechi again being angry. But I want for us as Black women across the diaspora to be able to reclaim anger, because if we are learning about our history and we are looking at the ways that we have transformed, as Jessica has said, within our activism, Audre Lorde has talked about it, numerous Black feminists have talked about the way that we can take our anger, harness it for positive change. If we keep ignoring the anger, one, it shows up in our bodies physically, but it plays out, it becomes an energy that we pass on to our children. So true change is for us to take that anger that is a trope that keeps being weaponized against us, reclaim it, harness it, channel it back out into the world that we want to see. And then I think that, the anger that everybody's so scared of, they see the power of it. They see the power of it. They see the transformative nature of it. And that's why they're so scared of it. So if we're doing these things, we leave a world that we can be proud of for our children.
So that anger is oftentimes how we're negatively depicted. And you're talking about the power and the agency, which Jessica also touched on, the agency that implies we have by having the anger, which might be rooted in oppression, might be rooted in the slavery and the horrible histories we've all been forced to inherit. But to Jessica's point as well, it's also about that solidarity and the way that we step into it to support each other and free ourselves. I'm thinking a lot about liberation as that goal. No, I love that. Uju, what are your thoughts?
Sorry, just unmuting. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, so I love what everybody has said so far, specifically about telling the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Maya Angelou said, tell the truth to yourself and to the children. That was like literally her sort of last words to the world. Tell the truth to yourself and to the children. So truth telling is sort of at the center of, the way I raise my kids, and the way I wrote the book. Bringing Up Race is really about telling the truth and being open and having conversations. At the same time, that truth can be such a heavy burden, especially for Black children. So the other thing that I'm really focused on is really centering sort of joy and playfulness and fun and just lightness, especially when, like last summer, the world became really heavy, really dark. A lot of days, like just feeling like, oh my God, I'm just gonna cry because I'm Black. That's the main reason. Like I feel like the weight of the world is on me because I'm Black, and I don't want to pass that weight on to the kids. So as the world outside gets really dark, inside my home, it's lighter, it's more fun, it's more playful. I let them just get on with, whatever it is that they need to sort of let go and free themselves from feeling like, oh my goodness, people hate me because of the color of my skin. So I think the main things is, tell the truth, but try not to feel and keep that weight on your children. It's a lot for little shoulders to bear. So that's kind of my...
I think this point about telling the truth is so important because it's so vast and expansive. And sometimes when you say tell the truth, people assume it's going to be that difficult conversation you never wanted to hear, which it will be. But the truth is also that we are joyful, and we are free in our spirits, in our hearts, and we're powerful and we're beautiful. And those are joys, those are truths that get put to the side, right? Because it's easier to say, oh, Black people are this, or Africans are this, or those of you in the diaspora, you guys are this. I mean, it's just so many ways that truth is used as a weapon and as a reason to keep each other distant. I want to talk about two things. First, the truth aspect as it relates, I was thinking of Kenya's work in the fashion space and what truth means there, which is so hard for Black women as we navigate standards of beauty and representation and depiction, but how you've been able to bring out that truth in your work. And then secondly, sort of going to Jessica's point about solidarity, I'm just always thinking about the world forces us to talk about our oppression and our nature of being oppressed, and it gets interpreted as victims. But what I always think is when you can acknowledge the impact of oppression, you can then move into the spaces of solidarity, not just solidarity through victimhood, but solidarity through our resilience and the fact that we continue to strive and thrive. So Kenya, let's start off with what truth has meant for you in showcasing that truth telling. And what have you learned from that space?
There's a quote that I kept revisiting in the past year, and it's this quote by Toni Cade Bambara, where she says that revolution begins in the self, with the self. Yeah. And this is a woman whose writing has meant a lot to me in my adult life. And I think with when you're navigating the fashion industry, they place so much currency on assimilation.
Yeah.
That
towards whiteness.
Towards whiteness, but not just whiteness, towards a very, very, very specific notion of whiteness that is very tied to the 1%. So, it's a whiteness that is, very wealthy and privileged, but that looks a very specific way and subscribes to a very, very, very specific notion of taste and what good taste is and how it looks. So for me, growing up in the fashion industry, this is where community comes into play again for me, because, it was my mother and my girlfriends who were just really reminding me and also cheering me on, and reminding me that you have to really lead with yourself first. Because I think sometimes we, as Black women, we are taught to be selfless, and there's that narrative of us as being selfless, and overlooked. But coming up, I had to actually be quite selfish and, put myself first in terms of self-care, but also in terms of like having the courage to really stand up for basically creating space for myself in an industry that just didn't want me there. And then also to have that courage to really speak up for Black women and in rooms where ideas that centered Black women were constantly being shot down or interrogated in ways that were very problematic. And so with the fashion world right now, I would say it's never been more fashionable in my entire working life to be Black. I mean, you have brands that are jumping up and down to find a Black model to front their work, especially in this time where people are actively seeking for Black-owned businesses to buy into. I think it's really interesting the way a lot of brands are now using the images of Black women to sell work. It's almost like a kind of, people talk about greenwashing and woke washing. It's a really interesting time in fashion right now. But in terms of, growth for me and navigating, this industry, I came up at a time when people very much wanted to be seen as, they wanted to blend in. And the few Black people who are working in the industry, the vast majority didn't want to lead with their identities. So they wanted to be viewed as Black designers who just happened to be Black, or Black writers and editors who just happened to be Black, but they wanted to be known for their work first and foremost. And so I came up from the very outset wanting to lead with my Blackness and my identity. And so, I've been writing articles about the dearth of representation in fashion my entire career. Like I came out the gate writing these stories. And so that was a really hard thing to do when it wasn't fashionable or, or again, when people didn't necessarily want to put Black women on their covers. And that's, been the vast majority of my working life up until the past 5 years or so. So, I mean, I think it's, I don't know if I think that was a really long-winded answer to your question, but, I say that to, I guess, really illustrate that it's been a real journey. Like, the industry has been very, very slow to change. And the vast majority of the change that has happened very quickly. I'd say in the past 5 years, but especially in the past 12 months, off the back of, George Floyd's very tragic murder, and the Black Lives Matter movement gaining even more steam, and then the reckoning that's been happening in the fashion industry as a result. So it's great. We're seeing lots of positive change happening right now, but a great deal of it does feel very surface level, and we, of course, have to look at the power structures behind the scenes. But yeah, I mean, so essentially there's a lot of work that, that still needs to be done in that area.
I mean, one thing that's always a challenge is you don't want to exist in reaction to. We should just be able to exist. But the truth is that these powers and these entrenched systems reflect white supremacy. It reflects paternal patriarchal systems. It reflects violence. It reflects historically what we continue to still attempts to recover from. So I think for the next generation, though, how would you want them to navigate? And next generation, from your children to even the ones that are just a few years behind us, or a few years, one generation after us. I mean, what is the biggest takeaway to amplifying your voice as a Black woman through words or deeds or lifestyle? What are you seeing as the biggest takeaways?
What I'm seeing that I'm loving the most is young creatives who are really leading with their voice, with who they are. So, they're really rejecting this compulsion to make themselves and their identity smaller in order to sort of fit with whatever the prevailing look is. And so they're really digging deep, and they're telling their stories, or they're asking much bigger questions, and they're doing it. Some of them are doing it very aggressively, which I love, and then others are doing it in a much more sort of quieter or more cerebral way. We're seeing the full spectrum of it. And I think that's what we need to see. I mean, this London Fashion Week, which just wrapped up a few days ago, is the most diverse season I've ever seen. And that's partly, I think, because it's digital and it's therefore more affordable for people to show their collections, because, it's very expensive to put on a runway show. But also I think we're finally reaching a point where, the work that's been put in by, a growing group of coalitions and activists, like we're starting to see the fruits of that labor. So, some of these students who came up and were, participating in these mentorship programs are like coming out of school and doing incredible things. But yeah, I would love to see young creatives coming up and just feeling completely empowered to tell their truth, to go back to what you all were talking about, Kelechi, Jessica, and Uju, which I think is incredibly important, to just have the bravery and the strength and the assurance to tell your truth in your creative practice.
So when we think of this experience of Black women, it's always tough with words and semantics, because one may be Black, one may be African, one may be Caribbean. The language just gets people lost. But when you think of the global Black diaspora, the global African diaspora, how do you address the challenges that women may face in the UK, or African American communities may face in the US? Where is that universality that you're finding with women in particular? Jessica, can I ask that question for you?
Sure. I mean, I was thinking a lot about, as we were going into this conversation, about the history of Pan-African activism. It's a very, very long, Pan-African women's activism history is very long. I mean, obviously, all Black people in the world are kin in some way or another. But what a Pan-Africanist mindset does is it makes people chosen family, right? You're actively saying, actually, no, you really are my kin. And the history of doing that is very long. So ever since there has been interaction between the continents and the spaces, people have been doing that. And you can go back to like the Amy Ashwood Garveys, for example, who is actually, of course, co-owner of the Black Star Alliance, but she has an incredible history of moving from Jamaica to the UK, to the States, to Barbados, I mean, Nigeria. I mean, she was just, she lived in Liberia for a while. She was all over this world in a time when there was no EasyJet or WhatsApp or whatever, right? She was moving. helping to organize Pan-African congresses and what have you, people like Claudia Jones. There are African feminist activists who are linking again to the diaspora, and we continue to do that. So I've been part of African feminist movement structures for like 2 decades, and that's what we do constantly, and we consciously make these spaces. And through that, then we also are consciously in the act, like I said, of naming chosen family and of engaging the words, citing the people, right? Forming activist alliances, showing solidarity and showing up where it matters, and also forming friendships. And I think we underestimate the power of friendship in actually these bonds, you know? And some of these friendships are literally life-saving, life-affirming, and become the basis of political solidarities and activism that we do. So, I mean, I see that very much so. And I think that now in this era of so much global knowledge transfer and information transfer, that's happening even more. You know, one of the problems with the economic marginalization of the African continent is just that peoples on the continent have generally been also then excluded from the projection into news media, publishing, cinema, etc. And I see that really starting to shift. In the literature landscape, for example, there are now the most beautiful literature festivals across the continent, super vibrant, like it was back in the heyday of post-independence. You know, so you have Ake, you've got a Bantu Book Festival, you've got, I mean, literally across the whole continent. And that's creating this whole new fascinating conversations and solidarities, and also Africans affirming their own words, telling stories that they're interested to hear for African audiences, right? That don't center whiteness at all because they don't need to. We have, actually, funnily enough, Bibu Bakarius is just putting a chat in. Somebody like that, she has been pivotal. You know, she founded Cassava Republic Press, which has been revolutionary, you know, in actually creating a publisher that could then support both critical thinking and storytelling and what have you, written by Africans for Africans out to the world. So I feel like the infrastructure is now beginning to shift, and it's easier then to share that back. And just the last thing, I also see then that from, you know, the global North diasporas, that there's also now a far more conscious effort to bridge. So you've got platforms like Black Women Radicals and others who are actually actively engaging African feminisms on the continent, forming relationships, reading people's work, amplifying it out. And so I feel like it's that, like I said, it's chosen family, but it also means that we have like really active effort, right? To connect, to share each other's words, read each other's words, comment on it, think about it, learn, right? And build spaces for the conversations we care about, center ourselves. Really the antidote to centering your oppressors is to just center yourself, because by definition they shift, right? Because they're no longer the center, but also you're nourished because it's not an incessant fight. You're actually doing the thing you want to do and putting your energy into the thing you want to do.
Which goes to the point made earlier about Black women having to sacrifice and be selfless, which is actually against us. So choosing ourselves first puts the centering back on us in the conversations. This is also making me think of Kelechi's work on with her Sally in HR stories of a Black women's experience in the workplace. And I'm sure, I mean, that hits me, it hits so many of us, but tell us a little bit about how you found the courage and the need to put a story like that together, where it's really about that Black woman's series of daily microaggressions.
I like to see myself as an observer. So I like to watch people a lot. I watch mannerisms. It's from my, you know, my focus on acting. Acting is my first love. I'm an actor. So I really like to watch people. I never really considered myself a writer until maybe 2018, when things started to shift, because I was being asked to write more, to, you know, I think 2017 really, to start writing more. And every time somebody would ask me to write, I'd say, oh, hold up, I'm just letting you know that I'm not a writer. And I remember speaking to my mum, and my mum was just like, but you have all of these amazing thoughts and you tweet them. You've been tweeting since 2010. And all of these threads, who wrote all of those things that people have flocked to, who wrote all of that? That was you. So why don't you stop giving all of this content to people for free and in such a sporadic way and hone it in? And then I discovered that the iPhone had gotten this new app, or this new functionality where you could make a face, like you could use any face you wanted and you could play around with it. And instantly, I knew that what I wanted to do was mimic a quintessential white woman. That's white with a capital W for both things, white woman. Because white womanhood in and of itself is a construct. It's a political construct. It was created for the very reason of oppression, right? So even how we look at how we try to exist as Black women across the diaspora, we try to kind of squeeze ourselves into womanhood, where whenever you look at the signifiers that we try to portray when it comes to that version of womanhood, it's usually trying to portray white women. But when you break it down, what are those signifiers? What do they serve? It's hilarious. It's actually ridiculous. And I love satire. I love being able to look at something and kind of turn up how ridiculous it is so others can see it too. And that's what came about with Sally in HR. I saw that I could create this person. Instantly, I knew she had to have an asymmetric bob, because there is a violence that comes with an asymmetric bob that I just wanted to put forward and give her the one earring. There's just a look that I wanted Sally to have. And I knew her laugh instantly, because I'd heard the laugh so many times when I would work as a temp, as an admin assistant. I always knew that I didn't want to kind of wholeheartedly work in a 9-to-5. I just knew I wasn't cut out for it. So whenever I would temp, whenever I do these things, waiting for my big break as an actor, I would come across a lot of people, and the laugh always used to sound something like, after they'd done something really mean, really racialized, that laugh would come. So it kind of stayed there. I garnered all of these kind of observations, and then created Sally. And the first thing I wanted Sally to do was mess up the names. Morenike, she called her more Nike. And then this whole issue that Black women have in the workspace that all of my friends have spoken about, that you come in with a different hairstyle and people want to have a whole conversation about this new hairstyle that you have. There is a violence in that. There is a violence in our experiences and our day-to-day kind of beauty rituals not being normalized. And there is so much that goes into when I think about Sally, and then I have to find a way to transmute it, to make it short and snappy so that people will laugh about it on the surface level, but there's something else. They're taking in a lot of messages from it. From the fact that the company she works for is Plant Acon, being a play on plantation, like just little things that when you put it together, to me, that is how I contribute to the political landscape. I don't think that everything has to be done through a particular channel that people are so used to, and then they'll call that this is therefore political. I think that there are many ways that we can be subversive in how we go about talking about narratives. And while it looks like we are centering whiteness in the conversation for the fact that Sally is a white woman, the voice, the person voicing her is Black. My experience is very Black, and I'm using her to convey that experience, because it's through her and people like her that we feel that violence.
It's putting a mirror up to an aspect of truth that doesn't always get to be highlighted.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I want to talk about this. We're focused on Black women and feminism, but that doesn't just include girls and women. It's obviously a conversation to have with men and boys. And you have a son, and Uju, you've written a book on talking about race to kids. So tell me first, with Uju, tell me a little bit about why you think that the role of raising girls shouldn't be relegated to just women, and how is it that you bring up conversations about feminism? How do you recommend people with children, parents, speak about racism to children?
So in terms of writing the book, I definitely was writing mother to mother. That was my first kind of impulse, because I thought, okay, I'm writing this book. I'm not coming at it as a sort of, I wasn't trying to position myself as an expert, even though now people, call me a race expert. Like, I'm not an expert, I'm a mother. And so I really wanted to pull in other mothers with my story and the stories of other mothers. At the same time, race is not a singular story, far from it. It's something that involves everybody and it involves all ethnicities. There's this sort of tendency when you talk about race to think, oh, Black people, you know, and then white people are like absolved and they don't exist. And so one of the things, like with Kelechi talking about the white woman with the capital W, for me, I capitalized white all through the book. And it was really interesting, actually, that experience of writing about whiteness and always talking about a white person as opposed to just a person, because they've been allowed to just be people and we're like the Black people or the brown person or the other. So I think talking about whiteness, talking about Blackness, drawing all sorts of people into the story, inevitably that involves, you know, fathers, that involves dads. It really pleases me when I hear from fathers, when I hear from people who don't have kids, actually, that this book means something to them, that it's sort of sparked conversations around race and identity, because it's something that we all have to deal with from the time we're children. You know, I wrote about my experiences growing up, and I think that's one of the ways to begin a conversation around race with a child, is to talk about your own experiences, to think about the way you sort of embraced racism, race or didn't embrace race growing up, the way you experienced racism or didn't experience race. A lot of us, even Black parents or brown parents, didn't really have a race conversation with our own parents. You know, we spoke about race in different ways. We learned about it through experience. And I think now it's sort of an urgent for all of us to actually sit with our children and just open up these conversations and keep opening them up, because it's like an ongoing conversation. It's not a one-time thing. And it's a conversation that once you start having that conversation in your own home, you're sort of empowered to have it across the community. You can start talking about it with people that you've never spoken about race with before. Writing this book, I found myself speaking with, you know, friends that I've had for years, you know, white women, Asian women. I've never had these conversations in the way that I've had them since writing the book, and also since the sort of explosion since last summer of focus on race and racism and Black Lives Matter. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your specific question, but yeah.
Yeah, and you know, so much of this is also white people need to talk with themselves about race, because that burden keeps being put on Black people, and in particular, Black women end up carrying that burden. And so it's really great to hear how the book has become a tool or a guide for parents of all backgrounds or people of all backgrounds to think about where race comes in. Let's talk a little bit about those of us that have the immigrant experience or come from immigrant households. How have you addressed race? This is just curiosity to me, because one thing I'm always struck by is in many African immigrant households, race and racism is not a topic that many feel comfortable bringing up. There's the white man or the white people, but they're over there. And how have you seen the conversations be brought into diaspora communities, into Black immigrant communities in the household around racism and race and the legacy of colonialism, the legacy of slavery, and sensitizing the newer African diaspora communities to these issues?
I would say that I always, when I had thought about discussing race or stepping out of line, to be the child of immigrants and things like that. I came to the UK, I came to London when I was 5. I was born in Nigeria. And to have that experience was to always be in fear. My mum would always say, don't go and say anything before they send us back. Don't go and say anything before they send us back. I was like, who is they and why are they sending us back? I was just telling the truth. What are they sending me back for? And this is also why I believe that healing is not linear, because my mum would never have a conversation about race and or racism. I remember when I would start writing to MPs when I was in my 20s, I'd be writing to MPs and I'd say, I don't like what's happening in this part of Peckham. Something needs to be done about it. I don't like this. And she's like, Kelechi, stop writing. Stop writing. You don't want to piss them off, because they'll come and, they'll come and send us back. And I'm like, they can't, we've got the British passport. Where are they sending us to? Obviously, we know that now, seeing what's happened with Shamina Begum, they can take their passport at any point. But case still remains that I didn't know where they were sending us to when we were already British citizens, right? So once I started to be even more vocal, because I didn't like that idea that people weren't speaking for fear that they would be sent away, I amped it up. I started talking more. I started teaching my mum. You know, I remember that poetry book by Warsan Shire, like teaching my mother how to give birth. I started teaching my mum about, you know, race and racism, and, you know, giving her the vocabulary for it. And then all of a sudden she was able to identify all of the ways that she'd experienced it and how she'd internalized it for the sake of survival. And so now, you know, my mum will come to me and be like, did you see this? Because what I notice here is that this is what's happening. And she's able to really, really identify the dynamics of what's taking place. And, you know, some people don't have that experience. Some parents are already well versed at all of this stuff, but there are some parents who have just tried to live through the experience. But there comes a point where we have to even help them offload that burden, unpack it, know what's happening there, so they too can be free. If anybody's alive, they are deserving of joy, right? And they're deserving of not carrying a burden. So I feel like my duty as a child that was brought over here, you know, with my mum, is to learn and then to pass that knowledge upwards, not just to my children, but to pass that knowledge on to the older generations as well.
This is why I think it's so much of our space in the diaspora is truly feminist, because we are not just empowered, we have the space to challenge these structures. And what you're sharing, like with your mom, is an experience that she probably would not have been able to have had you stayed in Nigeria. You're able to cut right through and say, this is what it is, Mom, and this is how we have to navigate. I want to talk a little bit about these feminist conversations and where they've shown up in the community, and really your experiences in writing the book. What is the different writings that you've all done, the books, the essays, what feedback are you getting from readers? And how does the inspiration to be liberated come through? How are readers finding themselves in your work? Kenya, I know your book just came out. You're probably getting a lot of feedback from people excited about it. What kind of feedback are you getting? Oh, you're on mute.
I'm still doing this a year into this situation. So I think overwhelmingly the through line running its course throughout all the feedback is that, you know, I keep hearing, I feel seen. You know, I've been receiving a lot of really beautiful messages from, you know, women on social media, which I check regularly. And so many of them say, I feel seen. And that really makes me, you know, it really fills my heart, because, you know, that's what I wanted to do. But I also know how much it means to me when I read books, and I can, even if I don't recognize myself directly in that experience, I do see, you know, there's bits of it that really resonate with me, and I feel seen in that work. So, you know, that's what I've always wanted to do also in the magazines that I've read, you know, so it really means a lot to hear that feedback from women in relation to the book. Because
feeling seen is to be validated for the fact that we not only exist, but that we're understood. Jessica, tell me about some of the feedback you've gotten from your essay in her book.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's a particular wedge of life, right? So there are so many African women working in the space of humanitarianism, of human rights, etc. And, you know, it's interesting because it seems like a world which is so diverse, partly because the context that it works in is so diverse, but in reality, it's really controlled by people who aren't us. So, I mean, I think people are finding that incredibly useful, to feel like, again, it is a voice telling an experience that's familiar to them. And one of the things that I always do in my writing is to try and elevate our history. You know, I've been part of a lot of activism on the continent, building feminist organization work, moments of activism that have been important. And I realize that so much of our history never gets told in writing. And in this world where writing matters, we have our oral history, it's okay. But if you think about it, it's also not actually the currency of knowledge in the global economy. Writing is though. And so I've realized it's crucial, like I did with So We Don't Die Tomorrow, where I was really speaking about what I saw in Eastern Congo, which was this incredible innovation in the face of extreme conflict. Innovation. You know, scientific innovation, you know, innovation in solidarity, innovation in ways of thinking about the self and what it means to survive, you know, such devastation. That is not at all the narrative that is told when we think about, you know, Congo, right? It's a space of death and of absolute ultimate victimization. So for me, it's that, just providing, you know, information and insight into some of our critical contributions to rethinking the world. Well-being is another example, just briefly. I mean, I've worked a lot in building up structures to support activist care, right? And activist well-being. And I know this is the well-being economy right now. So like the Gwyneth Paltrow vibes and all of that. But you know, HIV positive women in Africa were pioneers in this stuff. They actually, in community-based mobilization, developed all these amazing methodologies around self and collective care that were like super accessible, super affirming, you know, didn't require expensive gym memberships and stuff like that, right? Things they could teach each other, you know, that both were a way to challenge discrimination, but also to really affirm a holistic a notion of health, right? And to also support people who were being activists while also trying to balance like health issues, which at the time, of course, before ARVs and everything, were pretty devastating. That's amazing. And I feel like in a way it's more useful for us to hear about, right? Because it's real, no, it's the truth and it's accessible, you know? And so for me, it's like documenting that kind of thing is really important. And positive women have said to me, wow, thanks for that. And for raising that history, because again, people don't talk about that when they talk about well-being, right? When they talk about this whole thing of care, right? Which, like I said, is kind of on trend. So yeah, for me, like I said, it's the greatest joy is feeling like I am documenting our collective history and passing it on in a useful way. And so the greatest joy is then feedback where people feel that that's in fact, you know, what I've managed to do.
What I love about that example is you're reminding us just how integral self-care is within African cultures and societies, how integral women's role in keeping communities safe and healthy is, that we don't always, we just don't hear enough abroad, or we quickly forget about. We're told to forget about that as Black women. I keep going back to this question around the future of writing and books and storytelling. The digital age that we're in, you know, the companies like the one I work for make it so accessible to audiences around the world to share stories more immediately. And I know there's videos now and posts and stories and all of these things. What do you think is the future of writing and storytelling and books in particular? How can we keep that space alive and thriving? And how do we combat this sort of short attention span that I think next generation, our own generation, is increasingly having? Kelechi, I'm going to go to you because I know you've got so many great videos, and you just recently went viral with that beautiful rant, beautiful call out of how Tiffany Haddish had to do these award ceremonies, were asked to do it for free. And you said, my labor, I'm not grateful, I'm grateful to the divine, but I've earned every place and I deserve that. I'd like to share that, hear your thoughts.
I think that this is such an interesting question, because I think, you know, Jessica mentioned about our oral histories, right? And what happened to that, and the books that we wrote. Even during that, you know, all the books that we wrote, one of the things that was done in terms of when colonization was ending was that so much documentation was burned, and so much was burned of our literal histories, even the things that we did write down. And part of the reason that I have a podcast, part of the reasons that I'm so visible online is because due to the digitization of the world that we live in, and thus the globalization of the Black woman's voice, there is an importance, there is an urgency for us to make sure that we are seen. If we want to be seen, some people don't, that's cool. But if we want to be seen, there is an urgency for us to make sure that the things that we want to share is out there, because you can't delete this. You can't delete this experience. You can't burn this experience. And so that video, one of my musings while I, you know, went for my runs or after my runs, that stayed with you, that stayed with so many other Black women. My focus has always been that I'm not talking to anybody else but Black women. You know, I welcome, you know, Black men to be part of the conversation. I welcome everyone, really. If they want to be, you know, if they want to listen, that's fine. But I'm only ever really speaking to Black women. And I think that there is importance because I'm trying to speak to our hearts. I'm trying to speak to our collective experiences. We differ in so many ways, right? We are not a monolith. We differ in so many ways, but there is something, there is a divine strain that we all carry that we share a collective pain, and thus we share a collective healing. And so when we tap into that, you know, that permeates everything, that permeates every structure, every institution, every system that they've put in place around us. Like, that is how we liberate ourselves, by truly seeing ourselves, right? And so when I think about what's happening next, it's that we keep showing up. We think about short attention spans, but even the shortest words, you know, they sit with people, and that's what they carry forward. People don't remember the 298 pages of your book, but they remember the feeling that it left them with, right? And they remember certain quotes from it, and they carry that on. So no matter how short the attention span, the soul lives on, right? So they'll carry something with it. So I just think we keep writing because there are people who want to read. I'll keep making podcasts because there's people who want to listen. Keep making videos because there are people who want to watch. We just keep making, because if we keep making, you know, people will keep absorbing it.
Anyone else? Uju, I know that you've also been in the screenwriting and creative consultancy space in addition to the book you just released. Tell me about the where this fits in with storytelling in either a play or a film versus what people are now looking for are these quick experiences, digital experiences.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I just think everything begins with story. You know, putting our stories out there is just so powerful. And like Kelechi said, you know, it doesn't matter what form the story comes in. It can be, you know, a text message. It can be a WhatsApp to your friend that kind of changes their day. There is a specific power, I think, in a book. It's something that I think definitely people have discovered during the pandemic. There's something about just having, I think also the physical feeling of a book, the weight of a book in your hands, the sort of comfort food of a book, the way it nourishes you, the way it sort of, you can lose yourself in it, the way a book can take you on a journey in a way that, let's say, a quick social media hit doesn't really take you on that long journey that you can go with an author or a character or an idea. So there is definitely something about the weight of a book, but I think any stories, you know, whether it's screen, obviously we know the power of film and visibility, seeing Black people showing up, however they show up, is powerful. For me, still, I come down to the written word. My parents are both passed away, and we have a lot of oral history from both of my parents. We have a lot of written documentation as well, but specifically my mom was a real oral historian. She would sit and she would tell us stories about, you know, everything from like village life, where she grew up in sort of a polygamous home, to her journey to America, where she studied in the 60s. And there's so many stories that we never captured. We captured a lot of them. We did like a whole project when she was 70. We captured a lot of stories, but there were so many that we didn't actually get to write down. And I feel like there's a real power in just having something written that stays forever, and you can pass on, you can hand on to the next generation. So yeah, I think storytelling, whatever the medium, whatever form suits you as somebody who wants to put yourself out there, go for it. Tell your story however it is. If you can write it down, especially for Black people, especially for Africans. You know, we're great oral historians, but we need more written content, I think.
Yeah, slightly related, how does the physical form of your work in the magazines or in print compare to the other experiences of your work, which is very visual?
Yeah, you know, that's a great question. I think they are quite a nice companion to one another. You know, the visualization of the written word, you know, which is a very different experience, you know, with the magazines as opposed to, you know, what it is with books. And I think it's a really interesting thing that's happening right now, because we're seeing so many incredible Black creatives coming through with such vibrant, resonant storytelling in terms of the written aspect, but also the visual. And then we see some who are doing both. Whereas historically, it's, you know, you see people coming down one track or the other, but we're seeing, you know, a lot of mixing and cross-pollination, and people just really leaning into their creativity and expanding, you know, in the most expansive ways. So I think that's a really beautiful thing to see. But I'd like to go back to Kelechi's point earlier, your earlier point about the future of storytelling, and because, you know, we do so many of these panel discussions, and I always learn so much from listening to, you know, each and every co-panelist that I have. I mean, that I have the fortune of, you know, doing these discussions with. And I think it is so, you know, it's such a critical moment that we all find ourselves in right now. And, you know, we are seeing, you know, such incredible change happening in all of our respective areas. You know, we share book publishing in common. A lot of us work in the media space, the tech world, the fashion and the media space. And so I think what we're witnessing is the results of coalitions putting individuals in positions and creating opportunities for people. And I think it's so important to just continue that and like take the knowledge that we're learning to really continue that. So as much as I love the solitary experience of storytelling, I love the collective witnessing and that the experience that happens with social media, where you're bringing people along with you and inspiring people to create their own storytelling and creating that space for them to do exactly the same thing. Because I know there's been so much discussion now around like the waves of books that we're seeing authored by Black people, or the waves of magazine covers that we're seeing with Black faces on the front, or the collections that are being funded, that sort of thing. And so I think these things tend to happen in waves, but we tend to see the more longevity when you have more Black people in positions of power to create these things and keep them happening, as we saw like back in the 70s when Toni Morrison, you know, created space for Toni Cade Bambara and all of these incredible authors. And so I would just love to, you know, before I go, like encourage us to sort of build on that. I mean, we're all doing this work amongst us in this space, but I keep thinking about, you know, Kelechi's point earlier, how we do these panels so much and we talk about these ideas, and you think, well, how do we like carry this forward? Like, what does it mean in our day-to-day lives, or how can we sort of share that around afterwards? And so, yeah, I keep coming back to this spirit of like this idea of the collective work in relation to the individual, and how we can, you know, push more of each other forward.
I want to dive deeper into that. And Kenya, I know you have a time constraint. You have to go. So I want to thank you for being a part of this incredible discussion. We do have a little bit more to pack. So thank you again. But building off of this point that she's made around the coalition, the network and the spaces, I built a network years ago for diaspora African women who focused on Africa. And the idea was just this, that we could all find each other globally, for those of us that work on African affairs, and be able to kind of create the spaces we wish existed. So something I always love talking about is how we're creating spaces and using that to take care of each other and to amplify voice. This reminds me loosely of the entire movement we just saw a few years ago with the Me Too movement, and how the Me Too movement, born by a Black woman, Tarana Jean, was suddenly completely transformed and co-opted into a global, maybe white women's experience with Black women sort of as an afterthought. So how has it been watching that kind of movement take hold? Eventually, African feminist spaces on the continent and around the diaspora emerged. But when we think of this coalition building and the ways that it's existed silently, sometimes invisibly, where do you see our future in coalition building for activism, for storytelling, for feminist voices? I will obviously start with Jessica because of the work that she's done with activism and storytelling and women's spaces, but I invite everyone to join in.
Like I said before, if you center other people, in particular, if you center your oppressors, you're kind of almost bound to end up putting energy into them. I am a firm believer in building our own infrastructure so we can center what we think is important and also support people. And so I realized that all are necessary, and what Kenya is talking about making sure that, you know, in the mainstream structures, we also have people and support them, and those people also have a politics that's about ensuring other people come in the door. That's super vital. But I've spent a lot of my life working in African feminist space. And I've seen the power of that, because when you have your own resources and the ability to decide your own agenda, it's interesting what you end up doing. So for example, for the past 5 years, until last August, I was working for the African Women's Development Fund. So this was a fund that was created out of a frustration that all the money that was going to support gender equality and women's rights in the African region was being decided not by African women and being decided outside the continent. So the idea was, why don't we create a mechanism that would actually generate resources and distribute it based on our politics and what we think as African women is important for the movement. So alongside funding African feminist activism in all spaces on the continent, this has also created an African women writers workshop that has actually supported the kind of early seeding and genesis of people who are now out there doing amazing things. The African Feminist Forum, hosting that space. And through that, we actually produced what is really the first and largest collection of videoed interviews of African feminists. We have very little documentation of that. We've produced books, all kinds of things, right? So for me, it's also interesting to see what happens when you have, like I said, your own infrastructure and the kinds of conversations you have. And that's why I was talking about the literary, platforms that are kind of on the continent, since this conversation is about, words on skin. So those literature festivals, publishers, all of this stuff is super, super vital. And I think we, wherever we are, should think about that. Like, what are people trying to get going, and how do we support that? How do we sustain it? How do we invest in it so that we can also grow what we think is important? When it comes to Me Too, I've worked all my activist life on violence against women. So for me, the movement to end violence against women did not begin with Me Too, because it didn't. It was a campaign that became visible. And, again, this power of global framing that happens because we have a Western powered media, it became a focus, and also a way, I think, for journalists to be able to speak about violence against women, because previously it's a kind of unsexy topic, right? So a way to speak about it, but also because the Me Too in its iteration with the white feminists that sort of restarted it, was very much focused on privileged men in power. And so that, of course, is interesting, right? Because it's, Weinstein and such. But for me, like I said, this movement to end violence against women has been here for generations, and Africans have done pioneering work, including around actually modeling ways to prevent violence before it starts. And there's tremendous work being done by organizations like Raising Voices based in Uganda, Gender Center in Ghana, and others around literally modeling ways that we can intervene in social norms and behaviors and community power structures to prevent violence, which is a massive, like I said, gift to the world. So I guess for me, like I said, it's about where the center is and who you choose to allow to frame your reality. And I really think more and more that we just have to frame ourselves for ourselves. We have to just, the decolonization is decentering, and recentering ourselves, and talking about our narratives. And I love the way that Kelechi talks about, what she produces is for Black women, and it doesn't matter who else happened to listen, but that's her audience, and people can feel that, right? So that in itself is already a revolution. So for me, that's how I see it. It's about thinking about how we centralize what we care about, what we know is important, how we make, invest in our own infrastructure, keep improving on the ways we do it, and sharing it out. And whoever it's relevant for, so be it. But what matters is that in the process of it, we're nourishing ourselves, we're building ourselves, and we're transforming the things that are a priority to us.
So it's really creating these spaces that are centering us and focused on us only, and being unapologetic about it. There's always that saying, unapologetically Black. And so I want to hear more about the coalitions and maybe networks that have helped you, Uju and Kelechi, in the ways, so, because I think people sometimes assume you are where you are because you did this on your own. And what most people have experienced is not only the doors that were open because of people before them, but the number of peer-to-peer networks, the number of Black women looking out for each other, the number of maybe friends of Black women. How have coalitions and networks helped you too?
Mine's been really interesting because I think that I'm notorious for saying that I don't see the sisterhood that I would like in the Black British space in terms of Black British women. I don't really see it because I think that people are so deeply impacted by the insidious nature of racism that exists within the UK, that if there are these sisterhoods, they kind of exist in their spaces. And I find myself kind of almost floating and not really being in a specific space, but that's kind of worked from the space that I like of observing. I'm able to observe many dynamics taking place, but that doesn't mean that it's not important to have a sisterhood. While saying that, I'm very cognizant of the fact that I wouldn't be where I am if there wasn't the Black women specifically who saw me and saw what I was, doing and said, I rock with that. I want to support that. When I was teaching my twerk workshops, focusing on the sacral, re-energizing the sacral region, right? Re-owning that sacral region, reclaiming the body, as a survivor of sexual abuse when I was a child. It was very, very important for me to reclaim my body and to also, once I discover a path, I always like to signpost it to other people and be like, hey, this is the path I took. In case you're interested, it's there. And that took a lot of reading. That took a lot of compassion towards myself. And I fell into teaching pole dance and twerk. Now, when I wanted to take this twerk class to other parts of the UK, a white woman said to me, who had a pole dance studio in Manchester, she said, I don't enjoy your style of twerk. I find it basic. When me and my girls twerk, we put our knee pads on and throw down. And I remember sharing that statement, that interaction with her. I remember sharing that with people and the story going viral because people were like, how dare she? Because I put up the video I showed everyone the video that I had sent to her and why I got such a violent response back. And it kind of flared up this whole conversation about gatekeeping our practices, whether you have your respectability views around dancing and using the sacral region, we're just for the sake of shorthand calling it twerking for now. But if you have a problem with me dancing in a particular manner and you're centering whiteness as how you are, the lens with which you're using to view my Black body and how I dance within my Black body, that's on you, that's not on me. This is a celebration of my spirit. This is an expression of spirit. So that happened. It was Black women that really came together and said, you should open your own studio. Why don't you have your own studio? You should open your own studio. And I thought it was very ludicrous, the idea that I, Kelechi, who was temping and doing this admin stuff and very acting, could have a dance studio. And then we cut to 2021. I opened my dance studio in 2016 off the back of that. Again, looking at how anger at a specific situation, how I'm ostracized in the industry could lead to me opening my studio, but that would not have happened were it not for Black women saying, you need to open your own space. And here's a bit of money for you to do so. At every turn, Black women around the world do not know have come together and said, we see you. So while I might not feel like I have an immediate circle, which is actually changing now because I know incredible people like Abele, I'm finding that allowing myself to be vulnerable, allowing myself to actually tell a new story, tell a new truth, understand that truths change as you develop, right? And seeing that there is the larger collective of Black women that support me. But actually, if I start looking in the day-to-day, there are Black women who are showing up, who are saying that I see how you appear in the world and I'm not scared of it. I'm not intimidated by it. You're helping me to channel my truths and to connect with my truths. So I want to be friends with you. It's a new dynamic, but I understand that there is courage in doing that and reaching out to another Black woman and saying, I see you. And there's courage in being a Black woman and saying, hey, I want to be seen. So I'm embracing it all.
No, that's so beautiful. So much there. Uju, I want to get your thoughts on how coalitions and networks have helped you, either through feminist networks, Black women networks, or any kind.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just, I'm recovering from what Kelechi said about I want to see you and I want to be seen. That is so powerful and so sort of emotional. Black women, I think of Black women and I think of the movie Imitation of Life. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's sort of about the version I saw, I can't remember who starred in it, but it's about a woman who passes. So she's the daughter of a Black African-American maid. It's set in like the 50s or so, and she passes for white. She looks white, she passes for white. And so she's like in this household and she's hanging out with her white friend who is the daughter of the owner of the house. And the Black woman is her mom. And she is the one who carries the hurt and carries the pain and shoulders the responsibility and is just there in the background, unseen, unheard. And so this sense of trying to get Black women to feel more visible, to feel like their experiences, our experiences matter, that our voices can be heard. I think we have a long way to go. For me, you know, like Kelechi said, I don't really see, there's a lot of little pockets of sisterhood. I don't really see like a sort of big communal kind of outpouring of sisterhood and reclaiming our power. I'm a member of certain groups, you know, more like Facebook groups, which I found creating a safe space for Black women just to air their experiences, to air their conflicts, you know, not just with white society, but with Black men. You know, there's a lot of antagonism and stuff to unpack there. So I think that we have a long way to go. And there's a lot of times we're trying to start up things, and people do start up things, but then the consistency to maintain that, I think because we have so much, you know, the mule of the world is what we were called, and we have so much to bear that it's really hard to keep that consistency at the same time as you're trying to be seen, at the same time as you're trying to be heard, at the same time as you're trying to just represent for your community. So, you know, while I will say that Black women, I've absolutely stood on the shoulders of Black women, and I find them, you know, I find community not just in the people around me and in my girlfriends and in my family members, but people that I've never met. You know, I see them as my community. All the storytellers, the great storytellers that came before me, I see them as like my aunties and my mothers, and you know, I mourn for them the way, like when my Angelou passed away, when Toni Morrison passed away, I was like weeping, and my kids were like consoling me, like, what happened? I'm like, oh, you know, Auntie Maya has passed away. So yeah, I think we've got a way to go. We've got a way to go in terms of forming that consistent path towards a sisterhood that can really elevate and amplify people on a grand scale. But there's definitely a sense that these communities are there and that we have the support structures that we can rely on when we look for them.
I will tell you, my biggest issue with this is that Black women have always been doing the work globally, emotional, mental, physical labor, the lowest on the ladder, the lowest on the totem pole, carrying our communities. But yet we don't have, as Jessica was flagging, this institutionalization of our presence. And so so many times we see Black women creating spaces, using their time, talent, and treasure, all their energies to help each other, to carry each other, to see each other, everything you've just discussed. But it's not sustainable because we lack, specifically, I will say, the funding to make an institution remain. Because what is against a Black woman is patriarchy, it's white supremacy, it's the legacies of colonialism, slavery, it's the cultural nuances and norms that force us to try to make us invisible, which we refuse. And so I feel like one major point that I think is critical is the solidarity is always there, but the sustainability of our voices, just from a practical place, depends on funding and institutionalization. So I always wish that there were spaces that people could just focus on funding. Just money is money, take it from supporters you can find. But if we could really look at our roles in institutionalizing, in not reinventing the wheel, because AWDF, the organization that Jessica shared, African Women's Development Fund, was created specifically for that reason. And yet they too are also constantly saying we need support. So I feel very strongly about that. I want to close out this conversation because we could keep going, but just mindful of everyone's time, with the notion of like, how solidarity and comes into play, how solidarity reveals itself as a form of soft power, and talking about the fact that Black women are always looking at each other, for each other, looking out for each other, or maybe to people, Kelechi's point, observing each other and seeing each other. But how does that kind of solidarity through observation, through action, through coalition building, through writing and storytelling, how does that show up as a form of soft power? Jessica, do you want to take that first?
Sure. I mean, I think solidarity is at the heart of all forms of power, but I think it's also at the heart of our influence. So, you know, there is an increasing number of Black women of all backgrounds, Africans from the continent, in the diaspora, who are curators, who are in decision-making positions in terms of making spaces, creating access, etc. right? And proactively use that to set up platforms, opportunities, right? Events, yeah, that center our voices. That is one form of solidarity, right? And it's very, very, very clear how we've seen that transform. Yeah, we've seen that transform, and we've seen the spaces transform. Everybody's saying, oh, we've been on so many talks and, you know, platforms, etc. in the past year. Wow, why? You know, so something's changing, right? So we weren't invited so much before. So I feel like there's one place where, you know, as we also enter into institutions, become more senior in the spaces that we're in, we also always bear in mind, and should always bear in mind, that there is a historical responsibility to ensure that that contribution brings forward more people. So that's one way. I think another way is that, you know, I've been on the back end of policy and activist mobilization for a long time. And certainly one thing I've seen there is it's all about relationship. The stories, right? People see a policy change or a problematic law is tabled and then gets squashed or whatever, right? The stories we often can't tell. Sometimes we can tell, we often can't tell, right? About how that victory was won is all about relationship, and it's all about solidarity, right? And it's all about people coming together to say, do you know what? I can see this is affecting your community, super problematic. I'm gonna help you out. And we can see that solidarity across marginalized communities. We can see it amongst ourselves as African women, right? That's critical. It's really critical. And that's what I talk about relationship as being so important to nurture. Because one thing I know is that when times get hot, yeah, that's what you rely on to get you out of it, yeah? But also when things get to, a moment of transformation, that's what it is. I have a friend of mine who, you know, runs a fund in the States, Groundswell, that funds both reproductive justice activism by women, trans people of color, but also they've now set up a political action fund, right, that funds women of color candidates. And we saw how that activism, which was community grassroots activism, flipped formerly red states, right? And that basically changed the course of the election, right? That was really community-based solidarity to build a base of democratic voters, right, to get that man out, yeah? And most of it was unpaid, under-resourced, yeah? But people came together in solidarity because they realized that it was a choice between a new political regime or death. And so they saw the need to actually come together to change things. And you can see that kind of history all over. So again, I think it's that thing about just recognizing how vital it is, nurturing relationship, acknowledging that, again, solidarity is what gets us through, thinking broad-based, you know, about your allyship, and also always, always, always thinking, every time you're in a position of authority in some way, what can I do to help us? Yeah, and how can I use this positional power that I have to actually make a difference for us? And that for me is how I see the soft power dynamic working.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Jessica. Kelechi, Nuju, what are your thoughts? I know you've got them, so I'm either going to call it because I'm waiting to be blown away again. How does solidarity show up? How does the sisterhood that we're discussing and the strength of Black women, how does that solidarity show up as soft power?
Yeah, I don't know that I can follow from what Jessica was saying. So I'll just talk about what solidarity means to me. I think, you know, it's obviously it's community, it's coming together as you know, a joint force. But it's also about, I think, creating space and giving grace, like giving grace to the people who put themselves out there. If somebody steps out as like a leader or someone trying to pull you forwards towards, you know, rallying you round towards a cause, giving grace for times when maybe they mess up, or times when maybe what they're saying doesn't necessarily gel with what you expect them to be saying, just creating that space for them to keep evolving. I think solidarity is about sort of being able to evolve, you know, with somebody, to allow them to grow, to allow yourself to grow towards building something together. So it comes back to what you were saying about sustainability. It's about being in it for the long haul. And I think that is something that, if we're talking about soft power, I love the term soft power to start with, just because it's just inevitably a feminine term. You know, you think of softness and you think of femininity. But I think with women and with soft power, we are known for sticking in, you know, sometimes to our detriment, but women are known for being there for the long haul. You know, we stick, we sustain, we give, we create room, we create space, we can give that grace for building a movement that, you know, that can move forwards and that can evolve and that can grow. So, yeah, I think for me, solidarity and soft power are about being able to maintain a consistent relationship with what you want to do and where you want to go together.
I love that. So the power that you're referring to is really the power of our own sustainability and the ability to thrive. Because sometimes people think power is an exertion of your desires on another, right? And in this case, you're talking about the strength that we must preserve for ourselves.
Absolutely. And the strength that you preserve from sort of allowing people to evolve, allowing your ideas to evolve, allowing yourselves to grow together as a collective. So it's not just about, oh, me, you know, it's not that individuality, like, oh, me, I want this is how I expect things to be, I expect things to go this way. It's like, okay, let's work together and see where it will take us, you know, even if sometimes we twist and turn along the way.
And that grace, I think, is so important, particularly for Black women. I don't think we see the type of grace that Black women are deserving of when, especially if you're in a public eye, and the ways that Black women are completely criticized and held to very unreasonable standards, even by our own communities, even by our own people. And I would say especially, right? Right? Because it's almost like, how dare she? She doesn't know. If she knew, she would have. And that's really patriarchy at work. And what breaks my heart is how many people in our own communities don't understand how indoctrinated they've been to patriarchy and the enabling roles that they play in understanding power through patriarchy. And so for Black women, that grace isn't given. We're the least likely. I mean, it's what we're seeing now in the United States with white women, the Karens as we call them, being given grace to make the mistakes and getting off the hook, and Black women maybe doing the exact same thing and not being given that grace.
Absolutely. It is patriarchy and white supremacy in action. It is, you know, these are the two forces that keep you as a Black woman, like, constantly like, oh, am I saying the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? Will people turn against me? Will my own people turn against me because of, you know, whatever? So yeah.
Kelechi, I'm going to give you the last word on this question. We've got only a couple minutes left. So this idea of solidarity, and I'm so interested to hear your thoughts on how solidarity is showing up and as a form of soft power, or the solidarity that you've discussed earlier, your own solidarity as an observer.
Yeah, I think that, you know, what Jessica and Uju have said is exactly that. It's just the spaces that we kind of exist in. When I think about soft power, I think about bridges, right? I think about the fact that when you look at a bridge and the bridge looks rigid, but actually the way that a bridge is constructed, it still has to move a little bit in order to be able to stay, to withstand the test of time. And I think about us, and I think about the way that we exist. In our softness, we are able to withstand the test of time. We are able to withstand the weapon, the weapons that kind of formed against us in terms of white supremacist patriarchy. Is through our softness that we're able to shift and mold and move ourselves through. They always say that, water will always find a way. When I think about soft power, I think of ourselves as Black women across the diaspora. As water, we will always find a way. Water, yes, can be hard. It can also melt. It can take so many forms, but water will always find a way. And so that's what I kind of think that our solidarity is, that regardless of what's happening, we allow ourselves the grace, like Uju mentioned. That grace is a manifestation of the solidarity. We allow ourselves space to grow, to learn, and to heal. Then I think that, there's so much hope. There's so much hope for what we can create, the kind of world that we can create, where, as Jessica says, we shift the focus away from whiteness and focus it all wholly on ourselves and our divinity, and we can see what that brings out, what that manifests.
Oh, what a great point. What a great way to capture it all. So just a couple high-level takeaways in remembering the conversation that things are walking away. Number one is the importance of truth-telling, and truth-telling in all forms, in the joy that we have as Black women, and in the pain and the trauma that we've had to experience. The other one is centering ourselves and making sure that we always center this truth-telling to who we are and to our own audiences, if it's to other Black women or just to yourself. And then to Jessica's point around decolonization is to decenter. And so taking away those systems of oppression and being able to own our own space is about decentering. And then finally, walking into this place by intentionally creating spaces for each other and giving ourselves the grace, giving grace, particularly to Black women who are already at the forefront, but already carrying much more on their backs and in their spirits than it should have been. I really want to thank all of you for your time, your brilliance. It's been a real honor to be a part of this conversation, to moderate it. I've tried my best to keep quiet, but it's very exciting. And I want to just hand it over back to the Africa Soft Power Project, to Nkiru and Obi. I want to thank you, and please, your words.
I mean, there's to say, you said it all. This has been really, for me anyway, one of the most phenomenal conversations we've had since we started the Africa Soft Power series. I mean, the brilliance in this room has just been like beyond. I'm in awe, really. I was sort of saying that this should be a master's class. That some, it's just like just a tone and the. I mean, I feel like and grace is such an important word, and I sort of, for me, it's a key takeaway from this conversation, giving ourselves, the grace, and giving other people as well that, like, allowing ourselves to fail and not be so, quick to condemn when Black people are doing stuff, and we're so quick to rise against them. So this has been a phenomenal conversation. Thank you so much, Sama, for this. I mean, you are probably one of the most amazing moderators in the whole world. So thank you. That was excellent. And, great job, ladies. Really excited to have been in this room. Thank you so much. I don't know if you want to say anything, but we're really grateful for your time.
Look, I don't have anything to say except it's just a privilege to be in the room, and thank God I didn't have to say a word. You ladies are just intimidating, to be 100% honest. That was really, it's a real pleasure actually to listen to you ladies, and I think, we learned a bit. We still have more to learn.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much from everybody. Thank you, audience. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much, and goodbye, everybody.
Bye, guys.